Hello and welcome back to our Housing Fringe series of live roundtables brought to you by AJ Studios and The Hip. I'm your host Andrew, and this podcast was recorded live at our Housing Fringe event in June. The 4-part mini-series is an offshoot from our usual Hip podcast, and today we bring you our next session all about unlocking the true value of sustainable homes, hosted by Jenny Danson. She was joined by 3 panellists, Paul Norman, James Williams and Tom Sowerby. And as a room, we discussed the importance of integrating energy, finance, technology and data to unlock opportunities and value. They suggested taking ownership of your sustainability journey and forward planning projects so once your funding becomes available, you're ready to go. We hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you. And yes, it's not just a sustainability session today. It's a exciting element thinking about how we're going to fund it, and to hear about some of the projects. My name's Jenny Danson. I'm a co-founder of Healthy Homes Hub, which hopefully you'll be hearing much more about. And I very much welcome you to join me on LinkedIn and how we make housing better and keep homes healthier. My panel today, so starting with Paul Norman, who is Director of Strategic Asset Management at Clarion Housing. We've got James Williams, who's the Chief Executive of Cero, and Tom Sowerby, Customer Relations Director at Waits Property Services. Biggest job title on there, so thanks for that, Tom. So just to be able to position where we are today, we're going to be addressing two questions to work out really the question of if you're still looking how to fund your net zero upgrades for your homes. And as part of that, have you considered how your homes could be income generating power stations to unlock those benefits, the triple benefits really, benefits for the tenant, for the organisation and for the planet? So we're going to be looking today to find out more about those innovative solutions, what that looks like. I've spoken this week already around the grant fairies, and the grant fairies I don't think are going to come and sprinkle their fairy dust and get everybody out of to be able to fund the sustainability. So what can we do to look for off balance sheet and on balance sheet solutions? But how, more importantly, can we turn this into, rather than it being a sunk cost, how can we create some long-term revenue streams from it, as well as providing cheaper energy for tenants and significantly reducing the carbon emissions? So we're going to explore 2 projects as part of this. One is who's used the energy services model approach in Wales, which James will spend some time talking about. And Paul's going to talk about some of the ambitious plans that Clarion have to retrofit 13,000 homes in one project, not altogether, just 13,000, only a small amount that Paul has to look at starting from next year. So it'll be really interesting to explore that, and then to spend some time with Tom really understanding from a Waits perspective of how they're looking for innovative ways to be able to explore sustainability there. So let's kick off some questions to start off with. So we've talked quite a bit around the energy services model, but James, what does that mean? Bring it to life for us.
So energy services essentially brings together technology and data, energy, and also finance. So it's not an unfamiliar concept. In the world of commercial and industrial, these sorts of models and mechanisms have been used for a very long time. Typically, someone invests in the things that save us energy and save on bills, and there's an element of sharing that saving with the tenant or the building, and that model is designed to address this, I guess, challenge that we have, which is the greater that we invest in the property, the larger the saving is for the tenant, which is great for that household, doesn't really help all the other households within that portfolio. So being able to create a shared value from the household is key. It also starts to unlock a value that exists in the home that today housing providers don't access. So, and again, bringing it across to other sectors, commercial, industrial, being paid to turn things down or adjust demands, there are revenue streams there that they already access today. Housing doesn't really, with few exceptions. So a second part of it is unlocking the opportunity and the value within energy and technology. Bringing those things together deals with that big problem we have, which is there isn't enough money to get to net zero.
And just, I suppose, just sticking on that, how does that finance work then? What is it? The landlord that creates the revenue, or do they look elsewhere to be able to get the funding for it?
So I think if we start first of all from the fact that you can generate an income stream. So I mean, let's start there. That might help the landlord in raising money themselves. So that could be one potential option. I think what we typically find is existing covenants and financing is still challenging to raise additional money. So another option would be there is a lot of private sector infrastructure funds that have been investing in energy services models in other sectors for a long time, investing in renewables through project finance models that would want to come along and invest in social housing. The reason that they haven't today is because of, I guess, some of the complexity of it's lots of individual customers that you need to bring together to create the sort of scale that attracts in, the big pension funds or infrastructure funds that are out there. So there is the position that we sit in as a business is we see the demand on the housing association side. Everybody wants to do more. Everyone's saying there's not enough money. There is great ambition there. And whilst we do nothing, clearly we feel the issues of affordability in the household as well. And then on the other side, we talk all the time to banks and investors and funders who are like, we're desperate to invest in social housing. Show us how we can do it. So, bringing those two things together is the opportunity. And I guess off-balance sheet structures form part of that opportunity where you can potentially bring finance in without breaking existing covenants or financing arrangements.
And what happens for those properties, of which there are a number, whose roofs aren't the right orientation, or the fact that perhaps they live in shared accommodation as flats? How does the model work as part of that?
So, and I think this is, I quite often like to ask the audience, does anyone charge anyone for solar? We give it away for free, but do we do so consciously? So I think there is a point for social housing around equity. So in a kind of energy services model, I mean, today we celebrate, we spend a little bit of grant money and give some people great savings, as far down as can even get to zero, which is great at the household level, not great at a portfolio level or a community level. So energy services model are actually a way of leveling that up a little bit. So being able to share some of that saving, create an income stream, whether that's paying for the finance that allows you to invest in other properties, or even giving the landlord the ability to actually gift and credit back. And, these are things that we actually look at piloting today. But so there's an inherent fairness then, whereas if you're in the south-facing home with the big solar array, then great, you get lots of benefit. But if there's a value to that's still cheaper than the energy system, that's a much fairer way of being able to distribute those benefits of renewables.
Brilliant, thank you. We're going to get you as the audience involved now. So if you see the QR codes on the chairs in front of you, if you get your phones out and scan in the QR code, we're going to ask you some questions to see where you are now. So I'll just give you a minute or so to be able to do that and check the technology works. So the first question, is the first question up there? So who has a plan in place on the homes you manage to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050? So far we've got 6 that have nobody with a yes, and nobody but yes and before the 2050 deadline. Okay. So we've got predominantly no's on that. Oh, we have got a yes. That's good. We'll come back and find that person, unless they've happened to press the wrong button. That also could be an option within there. Okay, we will. Predominantly we've got 90% or more that haven't yet funded. Actually, a lot more than 90%. Okay, so should we go into the second question then? where are you looking for funding from? So we've got, I need to stand up again. Oh, the grant fairies, you see, are definitely back in there, so that's good. We like grant fairies. Private finance, the off balance sheet, or the surplus, or it's in the plan. So we've got a bit of a mixture. Still, some are hoping that the grant fairies live at the bottom of the garden, and they're going to come and help rescue. There is some of it with regard to the surplus, and one or two that are looking at private finance, which hopefully we'll be able to explore that a bit more, and we can all carry on wishing that the fairies still exist, but we may just be hoping still.
Jenny, the grant fairies go into hibernation as well.
Yeah.
We're expecting them to come out, aren't we, in the summer? But that's also part of the problem.
Yeah. So a lot of excitement around your massively ambitious plans for what you want to do to retrofit 13,000 homes. So can you elaborate around this and what the expected outcomes are?
Yeah, and there is still some work to do, I think it's fair to say, on this. And as I say, it's ambitious that it's the 13,000 homes. But of course, we've got 125,000 homes to do in total. So whilst 13,000 is ambitious, the number, I think our current daily run rate is we have to decarbonise 13.32 properties a day, which, as you probably all expect, we're not doing that. So the process we've gone through is kind of taking a place-based approach, and conversation with James and Jenny and others over the past 2 or 3 years. The lessons we've learned from programs like SHDF is that we can do these things, and we've learned a lot from that. But actually, the step in scale is what we need to do. But it's a step in scale where we're not beholden on the grant fairies. We know that is not going to be the answer, regardless of what government comes in now or into the future, because this is 25 years in the making. We need to take ownership of this net zero challenge that we have, and others do as well. So we have gone down the approach of looking at what are the other models that we can look at as an organisation, that, as we call it, the just transition. So that just transition is about how we make sure that customers move from their existing fossil fuel, predominantly gas boilers, so we have 80,000 customers on gas boilers, away to a renewable technology where not only does their bill stay the same or got better, which is obviously the goal, but they're in a healthy, sustainable home where all the health benefits that come from that, and that just transition then is not only the customer is better off, but as James touched on, then it's how, if we go down that private financing route, how we recover that money so that we can facilitate that debt. Because as it stands at the moment, there is a small percentage that you can add to rents within the current regulatory framework, but that percentage is nothing like the number you need to be able to borrow the billions to be able to retrofit our stock, and others will be in the same boat. So the place-based approach we're looking at is in a single local authority. And the idea is that not only looking at the ability to generate solar and put in, whether it's air source, ground source is an option, but it also starts to bring in the wider side of things about nature recovery, biodiversity, and potentially how we start working with local authorities, because we've got, in this particular authority, 13,000 roofs. So that's 13,000 opportunities to generate electricity. But there's other potential power stations that are, whether it's pools, leisure centres, schools, that, again, maybe there is an opportunity for us to do more partnership working with local authorities, that they can benefit from it, but equally we're able to generate more money that just, as I say, accelerates that just transition for us to get to net zero.
Wow, it's ambitious, isn't it? So to be able to help the rest of the sector, and also for you to then continue that scale up in your organisation, what steps are you putting in to ensure that actually that is scalable and repeatable in the model that you're looking at?
So we've started off exactly thinking that way. So we've picked a single local authority. It's the biggest one in our portfolio, and there's a few reasons for that, not just its size, but its location and other things. The process we're going through between now and hopefully by the end of the year is we'll essentially create a template that you could then drop on to any local authority. In this one, we're the dominant landlord, but we've got other local authorities where we're not. But actually, maybe we could lead that, depending on the local authority's position. But the idea is that we get to the point at the end of this financial year with a template that essentially we could share and will share with the sector. Don't have to use it. So we're using and taking a kind of like regen approach in some respects, where we're looking at doing master planning at kind of a light touch level that brings in all of those wider things. But to put it in its sort of rawest sense, it's almost like a checklist of these are the things you do with these properties that enable you to do this at scale, including looking at how the financing works behind that. And then, like I say, it's then a template that others can use, but equally we can use on other areas of our stock.
So what about from a customer, tenant, homeowner perspective? That's a massive undertaking. What have you done on that?
So despite all of the other challenges we have around the finance and the technical element, the customer engagement is still and always will be the absolute key to doing this. One of the challenges, or the challenge that we've all had as a sector, is the way the funding works at the moment. It's a bit start and stop. So the engagement with customers, you're doing it a bit of risk, or you're trying to pare it back to where you'd like it to be. So again, we see this as the opportunity to get ahead. And if we know we can do this at that scale and at this volume, you can be sure you can engage with customers at that scale, and you can talk to them about what you're trying to do. You can talk to them about these are the genuine savings you can expect, which isn't the only selling point to customers. I think we sometimes fall into this trap of we think that you're going to be better off, therefore why wouldn't you do this? And that's not for everyone. There's a whole bunch of things around retrofitting somebody's home, and every person being individual around how they want you to do that, for all sorts of reasons. So I think being able to take it into your own control is really important, and the way that we're dealing with it in this particular program is that customers are creating the engagement. So we haven't started that engagement process yet. We've got customer events coming up over the next 2 to 3 months, but the way that we will engage with customers about the models or that we're looking at will be designed by them so that they are in control of the way that we speak to them and their peers across the next 15 to 20 years.
And those health outcomes, so creating healthy homes, which you are doing, that also needs to consider the neighbourhood and the place as well as the home. And you did touch upon some of those things that you're looking at, but what else? Just expand a bit on that around the neighbourhood side that you're supporting in making those homes healthier.
Yeah, sure. So all this is wrapped up, whilst it's 13,000 homes, in our group asset strategy, which takes us all the way through to 2050. It has 6 strategic pillars. One is sustainable homes, which is net zero. The other really important one is the place shaping element, which is the bit that ties everything together. It brings in nature recovery. It brings in the well-being factors from people. And I think that's the bit that there's lots of financial benefits, but I think the well-being factor in this is probably, I think, will be eventually the biggest part that comes from it. You know, overheating, creating communities in a new world post-COVID. You know, we all live differently. Talking earlier on, you know, I live in Norwich. I'm based in London. I used to commute 5 days a week. Now it's a couple of days a week. So my working pattern's completely different. Now I'm lucky I've got an office outside. Most people don't have that. So people are living and working in their homes, which is not something that pretty much any of our homes were ever designed for. So people in that, it's how do you develop a community in a post-COVID world where people aren't commuting and do live and work differently? Do you create co-working spaces in some way in those communities that enable people an intergenerational contact as well? It's how do you make the diversity of those local authorities thrive in an environment that's all very new to us?
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. So, Tom, should move across to you now from a Waits perspective. How do Waits go about securing funding for net zero projects? And what advice have you got from your experience of offering to housing professionals?
Okay, so from our perspective, we feel that the best way to approach funding and that we advise clients to undertake is based around the concept of shelf-ready projects. So the idea is you're not waiting for the funding, you're not tied into the cyclical nature of that. You're actually working on pulling the data together in the early stages, undertaking options appraisals, so working through various models in terms of archetypes and what might work for your properties. And also really getting set up so that you've got a coherent strategy, so you're not responding to the whims of government or additional kind of funding that rises and falls. You've got a strategy. It was great to hear Paul's comments around working back from 2050 and almost breaking that down into carbon budgets, because that's essentially what government's done. They've got the net zero carbon target of 2050 and then they break it down into 5-year cycles. So that kind of thinking of building up projects that are ready to go at this stage. Once you've undertaken the options appraisal, just reach out to contractors, have a discussion. Don't be scared of doing that. You don't have to sign up to a PCSA, anything like that. The good contractors will want to show they've got the expertise and share that. So it can support in terms of developing a programme or the budgets ascribed to that. And then I'd just say on the back of that, you should have a really clear, detailed plan that will support you from a funding perspective, because it shows that you're ready to go tomorrow. And that's what the funders are wanting. They're wanting a reliable delivery partner. And also from a kind of organisational perspective, it mirrors your wider strategy, your goals and your objectives. So yeah, coming back to your question, Jenny, it's all about developing projects that are independent to the funding, and when the right funding becomes available, then move in.
And I think that's really key, because I think we probably all still see a lot of that, where the projects jump in for the funding rather than actually having that plan in place and slotting the funding in when it comes through. So we talked a bit about, and Paul certainly and James have both shared about collaboration. Have you got a particular example within Waits where the collaborations work really well to give a successful project?
Yes, definitely. I'd say the collaboration side, crucially, there's no good project that hasn't been based around collaboration. It's integral. The emergence of PAS 2035 and the roles aligned to that mean that you've really got to build it in at every stage of your project. And coming back to your question, Jenny, in terms of, I'd probably say Northamptonshire Partnership Homes. So it's one of our award-winning projects, so it makes sense, doesn't it? So I'll talk about that one, where we've worked with the client since the demonstrator phase, all the way through to wave 2 now. So we're responsible for 440 retrofits, and the way that the collaboration takes place there, and again it comes back to one of Paul's points, is at the early stage we're engaging with residents, and in particular the early adopters from wave 1, because our view, and it's shared by the client as well, is that the most compelling case studies are going to come from resident testimonials, rather than us knocking on the door and saying how great the systems are. So first off, really harnessing the early adopters, reaching out to the client team as well in terms of their resident engagement networks that they have. So NPH, for example, has a community bus where they drive around the postcodes, and within that they've got access to the internet, they've got essentially resident liaison officers, and they're sharing information there. So it's harnessing their existing networks. That at the start of a project encourages high access rates, because that's one of the things that's impacting certainly some of the retrofit models at the moment. There's some myths that are circling around retrofits and technologies, so we really need to control the narrative early on through established resident networks. In terms of during the project, the collaboration on NPH is based around a really positive culture of regular collaborative critiques. So because we've been working with them for 4 years now, there's not the client-contractor relationship in the same way traditionally we're used to in the sector. It's very much open, it's reflecting on what's gone right and crucially what's gone wrong, but doing that on a monthly basis rather than waiting for the end of the project and then doing a big full debrief. You know, that there's value to that, but really you want to be harnessing that learning so that the next resident in line benefits, not the next project in a couple of years' time. And then crucially, at the end of these projects, it's having a digital platform wherein all of the consultants and the clients, so NPH in this case, can access, so that all the documentation is there, ready to go, and you can essentially just download that and give it to the client, so you can lodge and get successful in terms of your funding, because there's often a lot of certification requirements around that. So the key points I'd say at the start, it's about resident engagement, during, clarity of roles and that positive critique, and at the end, that idea of a really intelligent digital strategy to make sure that you've got the evidence of everything you've done.
And just moving on to some of those, the innovative and some of those things that you talked about there, actually, of thinking about the innovative ways of doing things and moving those forward. And so this could be from a resident engagement, it could be from a technology perspective. But from what are you most excited about some of those innovations that you see coming through that you're using in Waits or you see elsewhere? What would they be?
So from my perspective, I'm probably most excited and potentially scared about is the emergence of AI within the sector. So I think it can have a huge role in terms of enabling us to retrofit at scale. So at the moment, I'm sure we've all been to enough talks now where it's all data, and we're building that body of data, which is fantastic. So we're building up an accurate understanding of our stock. But there's going to be a lot of work to sift through that and to analyse and make sense in terms of the options appraisal. And that's where AI, and in particular some of the kind of intelligent decision-making algorithms can kick in terms of weighted decision-making, what matters to you. And on the back of that, rather than having a team of, say, five data analysts, which you probably don't have the budget to facilitate, you can harness AI in order to speed up that process, knowing that you're making precise and consistent decisions that are led by data. So, yeah, the AI is the one for me.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very exciting. We have heard from all three of our panellists so far. I've got more questions, but I'm keen to see if there's anything from the audience that you want to ask now.
Andrew from Shore Sub Group. Paul, I was interested in the place-based approach. I think that the idea of net zero neighbourhoods is an amazing idea. You mentioned creating a template for working with local authorities, but have you started to work with other HAs as well? And how have you gone about kind of engaging them and bringing them along your journey?
So we're not working with a local authority to design it. So we are designing it from, it's our perspective, but with our customers in mind. And then it's something that we can then, because if we try and get everyone to agree on a template now, it'll never happen. So to some extent, we'll do it and everyone can then tweak it because we know that even within our own stock, what works in this local authority will need to be different in another local authority. So we're kind of trying to build it so it works for this one, but it has the adaptability. So depending on whether you've got 2,000, 10,000 dominant landlord, LAs, however it works, it's flexible around that. And then, of course, depending on the archetypes and the stock, it'll have that flexibility. So it's been built for us, for our stock, but then in a way that other people could adopt and use, whether it be a local authority or other housing associations.
Okay, great.
Is there any more questions from anybody in the audience?
Thanks. Hi, Eleanor Bowden. I'm from Pineapple. I'm really interested in this kind of model. I think one of the points that James raised about equity is really important. I don't know if at Claren you've got any customers that are already in net zero homes, but one of the things that we're starting to think about is if there are customers in net zero homes that are getting a much lower bill, how do we create equity between those that have already been receiving the benefits directly versus those that will go into this kind of model. And I think that's one of the things that the sector will need to figure out to make sure that we can make this as equitable as possible for customers. So we don't have the answers to that, and I'm just curious on thoughts.
I think I'll probably just build on that as well, because we've also seen a lot of organisations that have added solar into their roofing programme perhaps, but perhaps the resident is just receiving the benefit. Or as we know, in some places, actually no one's receiving the benefit because the solar isn't actually working. But I'll cross to the panellists. Who wants to take that?
We're in the middle of this right now. So, I mean, of course, so we've done a project with Pobble in Swansea, in Penderry, where you have 521 residents paying for solar. And actually now Pobble are reviewing how where they grant funding projects elsewhere, are they then consistent by charging other residents? And the conclusion we've kind of come to is there's a point of change of tenancy where you got an opportunity to kind of maybe refresh the approach. Very difficult to go in and go, you've had this for free, now I'm going to start charging you for it. We've learned that lesson already. So I do think that that's that organisation strategy point. If the organisation is convinced that we're not just going to give away all these benefits for nothing, then it changes the way you look at everything. New build, really good example. We've got great low bills. Most new builds got solar on now. So you start to see that move through the organisation, where they almost to the point, and I've spoken to local authorities that have went, can we start charging from next week? Because that's a really good point. And, we just don't want to make the problem any worse in the short term whilst we actually review our long-term approach to charging. But it's definitely a tricky one to unpick.
Paul, do you want to comment?
I'm not sure I want to, but I will. So it's really difficult because the answer is that, with the energy crisis now gone, most of our customers need help. So picking where to start is really hard. And it's no different to when we do SHDF funding or other things. We have to pick somewhere, whether it's asset-led or customer-led. So what we're trying to do is create a model where we can accelerate it as a whole. So if we can do more faster to more, then more people benefit quickly. If you start trying to look at which customer benefits the most, you then cross over into does that get delivered in the most effective way? If you just look at the assets, then obviously there will be customers in more need that won't necessarily fall into that program. So it is really tricky, and there isn't really an answer. I think it's just about trying to find a way that means you can accelerate this at a sustainable pace. And I think that's key, because just going at it hell for leather will probably end up in the inevitable poor performance and failures. But it's how you can do it, in the quickest way, maximising the people that need it the most in the shortest space of time, which is obvious, but very, very difficult.
Brilliant. I think we have a question from just over towards the back here. So I'll just make my way. Thank you.
I'm Patrick McHenry from Moscare St Vincent's Housing, and it's a question for James, really, regarding, you talked about funding, external funding. Many RPs rely massively on government funding, such as the SHDF now. Previously, we have tried to bring in external funding from other sources, such as Siemens. Back in the day, they had a massive amount of money that we could borrow against our properties. But the issue we have is, obviously, Council of Mortgage Lenders, our lenders, don't like these second charges and whatnot put on our properties. So do you ever see a time or a day that we wouldn't have leases or we wouldn't have contracts in place, even though we don't own, say, the apparatus or the equipment? Or how would you see that? How would you envisage that possibly?
So I think there are many projects today that are in that process of understanding the legal implications of these sorts of off-balance sheet funding mechanisms. And really what we've seen is that there are not any real barriers or blockers to that today. So we're quite well advanced in a number of projects, actually, where and we've brought in various groups, we've brought legal teams in to kind of walk those core principles of those contracts, many of which are familiar and have done similar things in the past, or maybe through district heating or other forms of schemes. So it's not an unfamiliar legal landscape. I think the point that maybe is the risk transfer piece, which is, I think, is probably where. So I think contracting is fine. Where do certain risks lie is probably the more interesting conversation in all of this, because that is something that between funder, landlord, there's certain things that are within the control of that service model. But we haven't yet to date seen barriers on the contracting or legal side in a number of projects that have come forward.
We were one of the first RPs to put PVs on. Mm-hmm. And even though I did want to put them and pay for them ourselves, we ended up going down the rent-a-roof, which was one of the worst things we could ever have done. And the leases on that and that rent-a-roof space, that was an absolute nightmare for us. And so we're now very risk-adverse on that. And it seems other things have come along since then, and it's a case like, the board well, no, we're not getting involved in that now. And that's the way it is. And I know a lot of our RPs are a similar boat. And
I don't know, maybe Paul might want to comment, but I think engaging Treasury early in the process to make sure that we're not going to be a breach financing or covenants is almost activity number one. Yeah. Most projects go through that phase very early to make sure that we are not kind of repeating some of the challenges of the past.
I think it's also fair that we've had this conversation in earlier sessions too, that just because we've tried things once doesn't mean that a new iteration won't work, because there's a lot. We're still really behind from a social housing perspective. the real estate world elsewhere has been doing a number of these projects using exactly the same things as the energy services model and others, and doing it quite successfully for years. And I think we've got long memories, which is a good thing, because we don't want to be fall into the same trap. But I think a lot of these things are not the same trap, and I think we've got to, I talk quite a bit around that strategic asset colleagues need to understand sustainability colleagues need to understand finance needs to understand both, and we still work in quite a lot of silos, and I think understanding that better and how we can work together and how we can see these problems differently and see them as opportunities, whereas I think we're still seeing these as threats at the moment, and it's a load of sunk money, and we're not, the only people that benefit are the tenants, which is absolutely right, but actually we can also have income streams coming in. I just think it's perhaps a different way of being able to think about it. Is there anything you want to...
Yeah, I think there's nothing I wouldn't disagree with there. And I think that point around, and you kind of touched on it there, that long memory thing is that, and James also, that the technology's there. This has been done broadly for a long time. Just because it didn't work the first time actually doesn't mean to say it will never work. And I think we've reflected on that quite a bit. And particularly the last 3 years, we've gone through that journey with various funding streams, SHDF being the predominant one, where I think as a sector, we've got better at learning lessons as we go and are being a lot more collaborative, as you were saying. And I think we're probably in a better position to do some of the more innovative, if we can call them that, solutions now than we probably were 10 years ago. The technology's moved on, the technology's cheaper, ChatGPT and that type of thing. Everything's moved on at such a pace now that, I think it's time to kind of forget what we already know and almost look at it in a childlike sense of going, what's the art of the possible, and then take it from there.
I'd just add to that as well. So when we come back to the government funding piece, so if you look at SHDF, there's about 2.5 billion that's left there. I think Moody's did an analysis a year ago or so that suggested that that's about 25% of the money required to get all social housing up to EPCC. So I think if you work back from that target, then very quickly it becomes a necessity. And then when you're thinking of it through that lens and you're bringing together all the relevant stakeholders within an organisation, you're very much looking for solutions and ways to make it practically possible, rather than maybe just aligning yourself to, that the funding fairs, as we've said there, and just kind of keeping your blinkers on, and it'll be someone else's problem in 2029, 2030. If you've got that long-term view, then it becomes quite apparent that we need something. So let's really investigate with rigour, as you say, and it's good to reflect upon the past and bring colleagues into that conversation. But it is needed when you look at it through a long-term lens.
It's quite interesting, actually, when you just say about it is still a long way away. Certainly when I do talks to a lot of asset teams, there's a bit of that when I say, well, some of you won't be here in 5 years, let alone 10 years. There is that little giggling of just like, I know, we're just ignoring it at the moment because it'll be somebody else's problem. But as Paul's already said, there's a heck of a lot that needs to be done, and we're already behind, and we've got a lot more to be able to do.
I was just going to, I think there's a point in the funding as well that's quite often we miss, which is if we have that long-term visibility, I actually think a lot of organisations would structure and set themselves up differently for the challenge. So I think the fact that we have short-term cyclic nature of funding means that it's quite often an edge of the desk. It's another thing to do alongside all the other competing priorities. Whereas if you knew you had all the money out to 2050, I dare say, first thing that most exec teams would do is go, right, now we've got certainty, how do we actually shape and structure our business to make this BAU? And net zero sits at the heart of solving lots of other challenges in this space, and it's the visibility and the being able to build long-term programs. To point earlier about we need off the shelf, we need to kind of be able to play those phases through with certainty. So.
And I think your point is right. It is BAU, isn't it? It's a kitchen and bathroom program. It's exactly the same thing. We've just got to be able to, in that whole wider strategic asset management, this is a key part of it.
Hi, Elle George from Elevate. My question's about industrialised construction, which is what we're calling MMC now, because apparently people don't like the word MMC. So it's really picking up on what you said, Tom, when you said that the residents are the biggest advocates. So I was in the Netherlands at a project where they'd used pre-constructed facades. So each apartment only had disruption for one day, and the resident was, saying how wonderful that was. And then they were talking about their shared solar service, where they had a certain number of panels, and they could look on their phone and see how much energy was being generated. Now, I've been to similar sites in Germany, in France, and Belgium. They're all doing it, and I wondered whether you've got any thoughts on why we're being a bit slow in this. For things like energy pods, where you could attach them to the front of buildings, where you've got all of the new heating and solar manifolds, or solar roofs or facades. Like, this technology is available in Europe, and we could be doing it here. And I just wondered if your programmes are looking at that idea. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent point and great insight from the continent in that sense. So in terms of MMC, I find it quite perplexing that we've not dived in more so, but obviously I've been in the social housing sector kind of maybe 12 years now, and we are instilled in the way that we do things. And it's difficult to change that traditional approach in terms of the way that we program, in terms of the way that we build. So I think it comes back to that leadership and that vision, and setting up, being brave enough to engage in the first project and track it through your post-occupancy monitoring, your resident testimonials, and then from that point, really shouting about it across the industry, sharing it with other housing associations as well. Because you're spot on, it's working across Europe. And you just scratch your head in terms of why it's not taken off to the level that we'd like to in the UK, especially based on the benefits. So yeah, my view would be we need to be bold, we need to be braver with that long-term view. How does MMC fit into that? Is it a pilot project in year 1, year 2? Do we scale it up, etc.? And then when we have those great examples, let's not be backwards in coming forwards and sharing those so that we build momentum.
I think procurement gets in the way big time. We need to make commitments. The factories need long order books. We're just not willing to make those types of volume commitments far enough in advance. I think, and the way that we procure and the way that we measure value, I think conflicts and fights against what we need to do with MMC, which is, bring scale and long-term commitments.
Don't you think that as well, that we've been really innovative in terms of AI and data, and yet the physical aspect, we can't build new homes with AI. We need the physical innovation as well. And you just said, Tom, about, let's do some pilots and talk about it. I disagree. I think we need to do it at scale, because you've just said, you can't mobilise a factory without hundreds of orders. So we can't really get going with pilots. We need to have a lot of them for those factories to be, to be able to deliver. So it is really, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's complicated. And, Paul, you said we're behind already, or, the numbers we've got to do. If we're going to deliver the scale that's needed, we need to think a bit differently. And I just think there's not enough focus on that, the scale aspect.
So we and a few other organisations, and Jenny's part of this too, is and I'm going to try and get the name right, Transformer, which is essentially an Innovate UK funded energy sprung with a bunch of industry bodies, whether it be BRE, and there's people in there from the manufacturing side of things. So the ambition for that project in the next 18 months is
15 months now.
15 months, sorry, because we're 3 months into the programme, is to get to a point where we can, using off-site manufacturing, looking at products completely different, to a point where we can do 300,000 homes a year to start with an ambition to get to 1 million homes a year quickly, which when you start looking at what needs to happen across social housing and obviously the wider PRS section, you can see the benefits. So that process is there, which is tapping into, like I say, lots of the pilots that have been going on and happening, but it has that ambition of scale that is sat behind it, and there's some big housing organisations that have put their data forward to that. So we have the stock we have, we can create that pipeline. There'll always be lots of excuses why we can't do it, government policy, planning, all the other stuff. I think we're back to a little bit of being brave, a little bit of trying to forget the past where we have done things with MMC and it falls over. The model is broken. We need to do something differently if we're going to do net zero. If we do asset management the way we always have, we won't do it. If we cautious like we always have, we borrow money the way we always have, this will never happen. So, we've got to basically grab the nettle now and do it. If not, it will just never get done.
Well, thank you guys. Can we start by giving our panel a round of applause? That was fantastic. Thank you.